Hello students, welcome back to Miss Bell's classroom. In today's class we will be learning about the 1930s decade in the United States. So you never miss a lesson, be sure to enroll by clicking the subscribe button. For this decade we are going to start with the economy, since the economy was a major factor in this decade. In the 1930s decade in the United States, it was a very tough time for the country. The economy completely collapsed in 1929 after the stock market crash. In March 1930, unemployment rose to nearly 25%. In December 1930, in order to combat the growing depression, President Herbert Hoover asked the U.S. Congress to pass a $150 million public works project to increase employment and economic activity. On the New York City docks, out-of-work men waited for food and jobs during the Great Depression. In January 1932, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation is established to stimulate banking and business. Unemployment in 1932 reached 12 million workers. In June 1938, the national minimum wage was signed into law within the federal legislation known as the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it established a minimum wage of 25 cents at the time, as well as time and a half for overtime, and the prohibition of most employment for minors. It was a very tough time for the United States citizens. So go ahead and take some notes on the economy. Maybe write down about the Fair Labor Standards Act, the minimum wage. You can write down how many people were unemployed. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, and I think the economy and the Great Depression was maybe one of the more important things of this decade. So I would definitely take some notes on that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to presidents. And the presidents of the 1930s. In 1929, Herbert Hoover was elected as president and served as president until 1933. When World War I broke out, Hoover was living in England. He helped to evacuate 120,000 Americans throughout Europe. Hoover was known as an honest, intelligent, and hard worker, and easily won the election in 1929. Hoover's presidency will forever be remembered by the stock market crash, which occurred just a few months after he took office. The stock market crash was the beginning of the Great Depression. Hoover didn't know what to do. He tried to cut taxes and increase public works spending, but it wasn't enough. Things got worse. Although the collapse wasn't Hoover's fault, he took much of the blame. He didn't do a lot to help the poor and unemployed. Homeless camps became known as Hoovervilles. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt easily won the election over Hoover. When Franklin D. Roosevelt entered office, his first goal was to end the Great Depression. In his first 100 days in office, he created the New Deal. The New Deal was 14 bills, which helped get the country out of depression. So some of the bills were Social Security, which assisted the elderly in retirement, which we still have today. The Securities Act of 1933, which helped prevent another stock market crash. Repealing Prohibition, which brought a new tax revenue. The FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which insured people's banking deposits. And Roosevelt was elected for 4 terms, which is 2 terms more than any other president. So go ahead and take some notes on the president. Write about Herbert Hoover. You can write about Franklin D. Roosevelt and what he did. Maybe write your opinion on what you think of those presidents. Okay, so now we're going to move on to some of the major events in the 1930s. In February 1930, American astronomer Clyde Tombaugh discovered the former planet Pluto at the Low Observatory in Arizona. In June 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was signed by President Herbert Hoover. Its effective rate hikes would slash world trade. In March 1931, the Star-Spangled Banner by Francis Scott Key was approved by President Hoover and Congress as the national anthem. The lyrics of the anthem were inspired during the bombing of Fort McHenry by British ships at the head of Baltimore Harbor in September 1814. In March 1931, the state of Nevada legalized gambling. In May 1931, construction was completed on the Empire State Building in New York City, and it opened for business. On the same day, in Aniakchak Caldera, Alaska, a major eruption of half cone occurred, blackening the skies in southwestern Alaska for the next several weeks. In August 1932, the highest continuous paved road in the United States, the Trail Ridge Road in the Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado, was opened to traffic. In March 1933, the Civilian Conservation Corps were authorized under the Federal Unemployment Relief Act. It would provide work for 2.5 million men. In May 1933, the Century of Progress World's Fair opened in Chicago, Illinois. Held along the banks of Lake Michigan on 427 acres, this Depression-era fair was a successful event, both in financial and attendance terms, taking advantage of cheap labor to keep costs low. It lasted for 2 seasons, drawing over 39 million visitors over its 1933 and 1934 years. In November 1933, Black Sunday in South Dakota, a very strong dust storm stripped topsoil from Depression-era farms, and the dust storm was 1,000 miles long. And here is a picture of the dust storm, so you can see how much dust there really was in the sky. And it was one in a series of storms plagued the Midwest. It was one of the storms that plagued the Midwest during 1933 and 1934. In December 1933, the 21st Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is passed, ending Prohibition. Now people were able to legally drink alcohol again. And I have a picture here of a newspaper and people drinking on the newspaper when Prohibition ended. You can see there. And this was in New York City on December 5th, 1933. And it was 3 cents to buy this. Okay, so we're going to continue some of the main events. In August 1935, the Social Security Act was passed. It would begin payouts to retirees within 2 years. workers began contributing into the system during the same year at a rate of 2% of the first $3,000 in earnings, half paid by the employee and half paid by the employer. In August 1935, the Historic Sites Act was signed into law, declaring a national policy to preserve historic sites, including National Historic Landmarks. In May 1936, the Santa Fe Railroad inaugurated the all-Pullman Super Chief passenger train service between Chicago, Illinois, and Los Angeles, California. In March 1937, William Henry Hastie was appointed to the federal bench, becoming the first African American to become a federal judge. In May 1937, the Golden Gate Bridge opened. Raise your hand if you've seen the Golden Gate Bridge or heard of it. Cool. So I'm going to show you a picture. And this is a picture from opening day when it opened in May 1937. So you can see all the people there excited to see the bridge. And you can just go visit that today. So this bridge created a vital link between San Francisco and Marin County. In August 1937, the Appalachian Trail, extending 2,000 miles from Mount Katahdin, Maine to Springer Mountain, Georgia, was completed. In October 1938, a nationwide scare developed when Orson Welles broadcast his War of the Worlds radio drama, which included fake news bulletins stating that a Martian invasion had begun on Earth. And this is a picture of a newspaper of it in the news. So you can see radio play terrifies nation. And so that was from that false statement that there was a Martian invasion in the newspaper. And it says, Mars invasion, thought real. Many fear world coming to an end. And this one was 2 cents, and it was written on October 31st. Okay, so in April 1939, the New York World's Fair opened for its 2-year run. In August 1939, Albert Einstein alerted Franklin D. Roosevelt to an A-bomb opportunity, which led the creation of the Manhattan Project. A bomb is short for atom bomb. Einstein had arrived as a fugitive from Nazi Germany 6 years earlier on October 17, 1933. Okay, so that's all of the major events that I have to share. Now we are going to start talking about fashion. So the fashion industry went under a lot of changes during this decade in response to the severe economic hardships of the time. So factory-made garments became popular because clothing could be mass-produced for far less than made-to-order custom garments. During this era, zippers became a staple in finishing a garment because they cost less than buttons. Less expensive fabrics, rough or peasant fabrics, and cotton became more widely used. In fact, nubby textured crepe or crinkled rough fabrics became a trend. The rougher, the smarter, declared one catalog, particularly for day dresses, skirts, and coats. And something interesting is women would have house dresses, day dresses, and evening dresses. And a woman would not wear her house dress out of the house. To shop, run errands, attend a tea, or see a movie, she would need a smart afternoon or day dress. These dresses were usually silk or rayon crepe, not cotton. They stuck with the standard silhouette and classic 30s features: puff sleeves, belted waist, and large yokes and collars. These dresses had more embellishment and detail than a house dress. Embroidery, covered decorative buttons, bows, and fake flower trimming were a part of the array of details. They tended to be solid colors or more subdued prints. Silky, clinging fabrics were common in evening gowns, often wore with the fur. Evening dresses had hems that very nearly touched the floor and often had small trains in the back. Evening dresses were also very fitted in the waist, slim and fitted through the hips, easing out mid-thigh or just above the knees, where they flared elegantly to the floor. There were gowns with puffs and ruffle sleeves. 1930s lingerie also helped shape women into slender tubes with a defined bust. So here are some examples of women's fashion. So you can see that they have the puff shoulders, they have some belted waists on pretty much all of them. And you can see some of them have some collars here. The buttons, you can see there were bows a lot of times as well. So that one has a bow on her hat, collars. And so there were 3 types of dresses. There was the day dress, so I'm guessing that this one would probably be more of the day dress. It's more plain, you probably wouldn't want to wear that out. The house dress, sorry. And then the day dress might have some flowers, something like this, that you might wear out to go shopping or run errands or attend a tea. And then the evening gowns sometimes had silk, and they wouldn't be cotton, so I would say this probably would be more of something that's an evening gown. You want to look nicer. Maybe this one might be an evening gown. This one, they're longer, usually very close to touching the floor. This one's probably an evening gown as well. And this is some of the men's fashion, so we didn't really talk a lot about this, but you can see that they're still really into the suits. Hats, canes. Their pants are a little bit baggier, like this one especially. But in general, this is kind of, they were still into the suits, but the suits were generally made with cheaper fabric during this time because of the economic hardships. They also started wearing those longer coats. You can see many men wore hats as well. Some of them started having stripes and plaid there as well. So this is some example of the women's lingerie that they would wear. So you can see, kind of looks like their swimsuits. The brassiere was a pointed tip, and they really emphasize the bust for this. And then the swimsuits also changed some during this decade as well. So you can see now that the women are more likely to show their legs there. So they're becoming less conservative, less modest, as time goes on throughout, because women in the 1920s got the right to vote, so they're kind of trying to become more of themselves in what they feel comfortable in. And then men also kind of wear like a little onesie here, so that was some of men's swimwear. So now we're going to talk about the music and movies in the 1930s and how this influenced the culture. So in the 1930s, many people didn't have money to spare in this decade because of the economic hardships. So there wasn't as much growth in music and movies. Go ahead and take some notes too. Okay, so in this decade, many people had radios, so they listened to the radio. Comedy programs like Amos and Andy were a relief from the daily struggle of this era. Swing music was very popular, and even though money was tight, movies were still a very popular form of entertainment. In May 1936, Gone with the Wind was published by Margaret Mitchell. So now we're going to talk about sports. In March 1934, the Masters Golf Tournament was held for the first time at Augusta National Golf Club, founded by the legendary amateur golfer Bobby Jones in Augustana, Georgia. In 1934, the 1934 winner was Horton Smith of the United States at 4 under par. In June 1935, the greatest hitter in the history of baseball, Babe Ruth, retired from Major League Baseball. He is among the class players inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York in 1939. In August 1936, the Summer Olympics Games opened in Berlin, Germany, under the watchful eye of German leader Adolf Hitler, whose policies of Aryan supremacy had already begun to take shape. One of the stars of the game was Jesse Owens, a black American who won 4 gold at the Berlin 1936 Games. In June 1939, the Baseball Hall of Fame opened in Cooperstown, New York. The first class of inductees included Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Honus Wagner, Christy Mathewson, and Walter Johnson. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the military conflicts and war. In September 1939, the United States declared its neutrality in the European War after Germany invaded Poland, effectively beginning World War II after a year of European attempts to appease Hitler and the aims of the expansionist Nazi Germany. And World War II began when Germany invaded Poland, so we'll find out more about that in the 1940s decade. So the 1930s had some pretty interesting inventions in this decade. So one of them was frozen food. So raise your hand if you have frozen food at your house. Yeah, and that's very helpful because you can go buy vegetables or fruit or any type of food. You can put it in your freezer and then it doesn't go bad after a while. Another invention was the analog computer, Scotch tape, Polaroid photography, FM radio, which you can listen to today, the helicopter, penicillin, chocolate chips, cheeseburgers, baby food, nylon, stockings, and ballpoint pens, which I'm sure that you still eat or use many of these things today. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, this is going to be a little different. We're not going to have a quiz, but we are going to play a trivia game. And I didn't say these facts, so these are kind of random facts that maybe you've heard about before. And they all are related to the 1930s. Okay? So if you know it, raise your hand. Okay? This is not a quiz. So what board game was invented in 1935 and became hugely popular because you could pretend like you were rich? It's not Life. I'll give you a clue. This game can take hours and hours. Monopoly, yes. So Monopoly was invented in 1935 because you could pretend like you were rich. Alright, the next one. The notorious gangster from Chicago was arrested on tax evasion. Who is this? Okay, so no one knows. It's Al Capone. Alright, the next one. The jail opened in 1934 and housed some of the most dangerous and infamous criminals. What jail is that? Or prison? Okay, I'll give you a clue. It's in San Francisco. Alcatraz, yes, very good. Right. In 1938, this man flew around the world in record time, which was 3 days and 19 hours. Who is this? This one's kind of tough. It's Howard Hughes. The next one. This legendary monster, or so-called monster, was spotted for the first time in Scotland. What monster is that? The Loch Ness Monster. Yes, good. Okay, the next one. A legendary criminal couple died in a shootout with the FBI in 1934. Who were they? Yes. Yes, Bonnie and Clyde. Very good. Okay, what comic book character debuted in June 1938? It's not Batman. It's not Wonder Woman. You're close. Yes. Superman. Very good. Okay. Who was the aviation pioneer that disappeared while trying to fly around the globe? It's not Howard Hughes. He flew around the world in a record time. Okay, it is Amelia Earhart. Okay, name the 3 most populous cities in the United States in the 1930s. Yes, New York is one. Los Angeles is not one. That's a good guess. Florida is a state. Nope. So it is New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. Okay, and the last trivia question. What movie debuted in 1939, which featured Dorothy and Toto? And we read it in class before. Yes. Yes, The Wizard of Oz. Very good. So that is all that I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed learning about the 1930s or got a refresher on it. Feel free to leave any comments on any 1930s facts that you know about that we didn't cover. And I hope you have a restful, relaxing sleep. Good night.